Transformational leadership is, I think, an emerging category of talent, of employment within organisations that is a direct response to the emergence of network-based organisation, which is to say a move away from traditional forms of organising and traditional forms of work, which are largely centred around performance and performance in role, to this transformational role, which is actually focused less on performance and more on change. Transformational leadership is not necessarily a new concept. What's different is that actually we're seeing transformational leaders as not simply the few in the organisation, particularly at the top of the organisation in terms of hierarchy, but actually increasingly many more spread throughout the organisation. And that's where this focus on the pan-organisational nature of the role becomes extremely important. In terms of the work that we've done, we identify with organisations that seek to develop leadership capability both up and down and across the organisation, often geared around informal networks, but that are highly connected and can connect with each other in order to actually lead a very profound transformation or shift in the nature of the organisation to ensure that it's better fit for purpose. And this is very much shifting the focus away from traditional conceptions of leadership, which see the role and capacity for change to be purely the gift of those at the top, to actually saying it's something that is actually an organisational capability, and it's spread throughout the organisation. What it requires is individuals' talent who are highly connected, highly entrepreneurial, but at the same time also able to exercise sound judgment in order to balance the risks between change on the one hand and efficiency and stability on the other. There's a very clear distinction between, in a sense, broadly, perhaps simplistically, two categories of talent within organisations going forward. Performers on the one hand and transformers on the other. And for me, performers are all about executing as well as might be possible, given the circumstances of the business, against set targets, against a particular known field or a field in which we wish to maximise the strategic advantage of the organisation. Transformers are something else. They are actually not so much focused on performance maximisation, they're actually focused on how do you change the organisation whilst maintaining levels of performance. So one of the key aspects here is actually for transformers and transformational leadership is balancing the trade-off between change on the one hand and stability on the other, between innovation and efficiency. And that's a very hard balancing act to achieve. All of the traditional drivers for engaging talent that we've relied upon in the past, pay, highly leveraged incentives, various other things, actually probably will be less effective for our transformers and transformational leadership capability going forward. It's actually much more about the ability to influence, it's much more about impact. Actually, fundamentally, key to the proposition for employing these individuals, these groups, is the opportunity to make a difference. Not every organisation should develop transformational leadership capability. Not every organisation needs them. Certainly if you are producing a product which is simple and standardised, it probably is still the imperative for performance maximisation in the way that it always has been in the past, characteristic of bureaucratic organisation. And by bureaucratic organisation, I don't mean efficiency, I mean quite the opposite. The model of organisation that it gives you the ability to, in some sense, control and predict supply relative to predictable demand, as much as we can know these things. But for other organisations, particularly those who are emerging much more or seeking to differentiate themselves much more away from the traditional model of organisation, then transformational leadership capability and indeed the organisational capability to manage and balance on the one hand performance against change in our ever-changing environment, it will be key going forward. We perceive Steve Jobs as being a very positive story. Perhaps we perceive George Entwistle, the former, until recently, Director General of the BBC, as being a negative story. But what they have in common is essentially we're holding an individual to account for the fortunes of the organisation, even though that individual probably, necessarily, could have had very little personal direct control over what happened. So those at the top of our organisations currently are accountable without necessarily being responsible. And that's a very interesting dynamic. And for me, transformational leadership is going beyond the individual to say, actually, how do we become more effective communities as organisations? How do we generate a more conscious and proactive and cohesive community as an organisation that itself has a degree of consciousness or collective wisdom, the wisdom of the crowd, and how are we able to then benefit from that in terms of the decisions we make? All of this is extremely important because actually the operating environment in the public, private, or indeed the not-for-profit sector is only becoming more complex. And so necessarily we need to rely upon the wisdom of these community-based networks, community-based working in order to survive in that complex environment, as opposed to purely putting our fortunes in the hands of the few individuals at the top of the organisation, no matter how miraculous or otherwise they might be.